She ordered her coffee black, same as always. The barista recognized her as the woman who sat in the corner, quiet and steady, never looking for attention. She kept her eyes on the room, a habit no one questioned. They had no idea she still thought in tactics. That morning, a group of teenagers started harassing an elderly man at the next table. Her posture changed, eyes narrowing as she watched. Around her, people stayed in their seats, phones out, but hands still. No one moved to help until she did. Some instincts don't fade, even when the uniform is gone. Every morning at 7:15, she stepped through the coffee shop door. The staff had learned to expect her, setting a cup out as soon as she appeared. She ordered black coffee, no sugar, no cream, and chose the same corner booth every time where the wall met the window, giving her a clean view of both exits and the entire room. She rarely spoke beyond a quiet thank you. To the regulars and staff, she was the woman who read military history or filled in crossword puzzles with a steady hand. She always sat with her back to the wall, cup in her right hand, tactics ingrained by years in combat. Her left hand stayed free, her eyes tracking the door without seeming to stare. The barista once joked she was like someone out of a spy film. She only smiled, stirring her coffee, never confirming or denying anything. Her routine was precise but never drew attention. She wiped the table before sitting, folded her jacket neatly, set her phone face down. Nothing about her appearance suggested anything out of the ordinary. A middle-aged woman, short brown hair streaked with grey, boots that had seen years of wear. If she asked for the music to be turned down, or quietly shifted seats when the light caught her eyes, no one thought twice. But there were tells for anyone who knew what to look for. Her shoulders tensed when someone entered behind her. Her fingers paused on the page if voices rose nearby. She watched reflections in the window, scanning for movement. These habits weren't quirks. They were the residue of training, the kind that never fully leaves. The manager remembered one morning when the shop was packed and someone asked to share her booth. She agreed, polite as always, but left within minutes, coffee unfinished. At the time, it seemed like nothing. Later, it made sense. That corner seat wasn't about comfort. It was about maintaining sightlines, controlling angles, having options. Before she was the quiet woman with the black coffee, she was Sergeant Elena Vasquez, 10th Mountain Division, 3 tours in Afghanistan, urban combat, close quarters protection. The army didn't just teach her to fight, it rewired how she moved through the world. On that day, the routine she'd built was about to be tested. The shop's morning hum was about to sharpen, and her old instincts would find new purpose. A pack of teenagers burst through the door, laughing too loud and jostling each other as they made their way between tables. The coffee shop's usual rhythm faltered. The old man at the next table didn't look up from his newspaper. His hands shook as he lifted his cup, the tremor sending ripples across the surface. One of the teens nudged his friend and grinned. "Check out shaky grandpa over here." The others snickered. The man turned a page, moving slowly, refusing to react. It started small, a fake cough, when the man sipped his drink, an exaggerated imitation of his shaking hands. Then one of the boys knocked his elbow, spilling coffee across the table. "Oops," the teen said, not bothering to help as the liquid dripped onto the man's trousers. Their voices grew louder. They started calling him names, Parkinson's Pete, mimicking his movements, while a phone camera recorded every second. The barista froze behind the counter, uncertain, while customers kept their eyes on their screens or stared anywhere but at the scene. No one moved. The silence stretched, heavy and uncomfortable, as the teens grew bolder. The old man dabbed at the stain on his pants, jaw clenched, but said nothing. A chair scraped against the floor. She closed her book and slipped it into her bag, then stood. There was no sudden movement, just a shift in energy, quiet but unmistakable. She angled her body toward the group, stepping out from her booth and intercepting their line of sight to the old man. In her mind, she was already calculating angles and exits, noting the positions of the tables, the distance to the door. She didn't approach head-on. Instead, she moved to stand between the teens and the exit, making it clear that leaving would require passing her. The most observant in the room might have noticed how she squared her shoulders, her stance steady but non-threatening. She kept her hands loose at her sides, voice low but firm when she spoke. "You're done here." The ringleader tried to laugh it off. "What's your problem, lady?" But the mood had shifted. Her presence measured, unafraid left, no easy way for them to push past without making a choice. The certainty in her posture was unmistakable. The teens hesitated for the first time, their bravado slipping as they exchanged uneasy glances. She waited, silent, watching them decide their next move. The laughter in the cafe vanished the moment she stepped forward. She didn't posture or threaten, she simply moved, placing herself between the teenagers and the old man, her steps deliberate. Her voice was steady. "Walk away." It wasn't a plea or a challenge, just a fact. The ringleader's confidence faltered. He was taller, broader, but something about her calm unsettled him. His friends shifted their weight, eyes darting to the door. One of the teens muttered under his breath and tried to push past her. She didn't flinch. As his hand reached out, she redirected him in a single motion, guiding his momentum past her with a controlled hold. He stumbled, catching himself against a chair, surprise written across his face. She reset, feet planted, hands loose at her sides, never raising her voice or letting her pulse race. The biggest of the group lunged, swinging wild. She sidestepped, her right hand locking onto his forearm, her left pressing into the nerve cluster just below his ear. He gasped, knees buckling, and dropped to the floor. The hold was precise, trained to incapacitate without harm. She released him as soon as he sagged, stepping back as he struggled upright, his breath shallow and eyes wide. Every movement was spare, efficient. She didn't escalate. She didn't taunt. She kept her focus on the group, eyes flicking from one to the next, always aware of the room's angles and exits. The others hesitated, unsure, their bravado slipping away. The leader backed toward the door, muttering under his breath, "She's nuts." But the conviction was gone. The group followed, the subdued one rubbing his neck, all of them glancing back as if expecting her to do more. She didn't. She turned to the old man, her posture softening. "You all right?" Her tone changed flat, almost gentle, as if the switch had been thrown and the tension drained away. Some in the cafe would later argue about what they'd seen. A few thought she'd barely touched the teen. Others swore he'd been thrown across the room. The barista, still shaken, would only say, "She didn't even look angry." That was the part that unsettled them, the absence of drama, the sense that it was just routine, like catching a falling cup before it hit the ground. The old man steadied his hands, meeting her eyes. "You didn't have to do that." She glanced at the door, then back at him. "Yeah," she said. "I did." Around them, the cafe was silent, customers still processing what had happened, unsure what they'd witnessed or how to talk about it. Before anyone could break the quiet, a voice from the group of teens cut through the hush, demanding an explanation for what they'd just seen. The tallest teen's voice faltered as he stared at her, but she didn't answer. Instead, she shifted her stance, her jacket sleeve sliding up to reveal the inside of her forearm. Ink marked her skin, an eagle perched on crossed rifles, with a small 10 beneath a division mark. The design was faded, almost easy to miss. But near the register, a man in a worn Marine Corps hoodie set down his coffee hard enough to make the cups rattle. His eyes didn't leave the tattoo. He leaned forward, voice cutting through the silence. 10th Mountain Division. You just watched one of theirs in action." The words hung in the air, direct and final. The teens froze, the meaning settling in. The Marine's tone made it clear this wasn't a story or a warning. It was a fact, and everyone in the room felt the shift. He looked at the woman, his expression steady but respectful. Staff or sergeant? The question was simple, but it carried weight. She met his gaze, her voice quieter but more certain than before. "Staff, once." The Marine nodded, satisfied. The teens shrank back, their bravado gone. The ringleader's jaw worked, but no sound came. One of his friends touched his neck, remembering the pain, the lesson. Their exit was silent, no parting shot, just a hurried shuffle toward the door. The last one paused, glancing back at the tattoo before disappearing outside. The cafe stayed quiet, the moment stretching as everyone processed what they'd seen. A woman at a side table spoke, half to herself. "I thought that was just an old tattoo." The Marine shook his head, not looking away from the sergeant. "Nobody gets that unless they earned it." His words were even, not for show, but for understanding. The woman moved to the counter, picking up the old man's empty cup and handing it to the barista. "New one, please. Hot." Her tone was unchanged, as if nothing unusual had happened. The barista nodded, glancing at the Marine, then at the sergeant's sleeve, now pulled back down. The regulars sat a little straighter, conversations hushed. As she returned to her table, the old man reached out, steadying himself with one hand. "Thank you, soldier." The word landed with quiet certainty, and she nodded once, her face unreadable. Around them, the cafe seemed to reset, but the air held a new tension and awareness of what had just happened, and what it meant about the people you think you know. No one asked why the others hadn't stepped in. Not yet. But the question lingered, quiet and unresolved, as the morning resumed. Inside the cafe, most customers had watched the scene unfold with their hands wrapped tight around mugs or phones, eyes flicking between the teenagers and the woman in the corner. Nobody moved. Not the college student with headphones, not the mother pulling her toddler close, not the barista behind the counter. In a crowd, everyone assumed someone else would act except one person used her training. The bystander effect is simple. The more people present, the easier it is to wait and hope someone else will step up. It isn't about fear or indifference. It's a quiet calculation, a split-second pause where each person measures risk and responsibility. People see trouble, but their minds stall. Maybe the manager will handle it. Maybe it isn't their place. Maybe it's safer to stay quiet. 17 people in that cafe, each with a reason to hesitate. Military training cuts through that hesitation. Dr. Elena Ruiz, who spent years working with army recruits, puts it plainly. Basic training erases. Hesitation veterans don't debate stepping in, they just act. Soldiers drill until response is automatic. They learn to scan a room, identify threats, and move without waiting for approval. It's not about wanting a fight. It's about being unable to ignore the need for action when someone is at risk. That difference played out in every detail. The woman never looked for backup, never waited to see if another adult would intervene. When she stood, her focus narrowed to the old man and the teens. No glances for reassurance, no searching for help. She assessed, decided, and moved her actions shaped by years of conditioning. The Marine who recognized her tattoo saw it in her posture. Later, he'd say, "You could tell she'd done this before, not the fighting, the deciding." For most, the moment passed as a blur of tension and relief. But for those who watched closely, it was clear she operated on a different set of rules. The bystander effect didn't vanish in that coffee shop. It was simply overpowered by someone whose instincts left no room for delay. As the last echoes of the confrontation faded, the room seemed to breathe again. The teen's retreat left a hush behind, but the old man's trembling hands reminded everyone that the story wasn't finished. Elena knelt beside Jacob, her movements calm and measured. She placed a steady hand under his elbow and spoke in a voice that carried no urgency, just quiet assurance. "Deep breaths," she said, her tone gentle, meant to anchor rather than direct. She kept her presence close but non-intrusive, giving Jacob a point of focus as his breathing slowed from ragged to steady. She introduced herself with a simple, "My name's Elena." No probing questions, just a gentle nudge toward the present. Jacob met her eyes, his own still glassy with adrenaline. "Jacob," he managed, voice thin. Elena nodded, keeping her gaze steady. "Good. Stay with me, Jacob." Her words had the cadence of someone who'd done this before, the kind of reassurance that comes from experience rather than training manuals. Jacob's hands began to unclench from his cup. He looked at Elena, searching for something familiar in her face. "You talk just like him." He paused, gathering himself. "Korean war medic. Pulled me out of a ditch outside Seoul. Said the same thing, 'Keep looking at me.'" He hesitated, then added, "His name was Elias." Elena's posture shifted, a small acknowledgement. She recognized the moment, not from memory, but from the rhythm of these encounters, veterans reaching across time, finding each other in the aftermath of chaos. She'd seen it before. Marines in dusty tents, old men in VA waiting rooms, stories passed in fragments and glances. Elias knew what mattered, she said. Her words were plain, a nod to the lineage that connected them both. Jacob let out a slow breath. "You're a doc." It wasn't a question. Elena answered. Was. 10th Mountain Division, combat medic. The Marine who'd recognized her earlier stood nearby, silent witness to the exchange. Jacob reached into his jacket and pulled out a photograph creased, black and white, edges worn thin. A young man leaned against a jeep, helmet askew, grin wide and sure. He didn't offer it, just let Elena see. She nodded once. Good man. The conversation was brief, but it left something behind, a sense that the bonds forged in war don't disappear, even as years pass and uniforms fade. Elena stood, her presence no longer urgent, but still grounding. Around them, the cafe settled into a quieter rhythm, the moment marked but not discussed. Behind the counter, the barista watched, her hands still on the espresso machine, trying to make sense of what she'd just witnessed. For the barista, the lesson arrived quietly, in the aftermath of a morning that started like any other. She'd poured Elena's coffee countless times, thinking of her as just another regular, reserved, polite, always in the corner by the window. But that day, when everything changed, she realized how much she'd missed. The woman she'd once described as just quiet had revealed a depth the barista never expected to see, a capability that made her rethink every casual greeting and unnoticed exchange over the past 2 years. The owner, a Vietnam-era Army vet, didn't say much. He printed Elena's running tab and framed it under glass with a note. Reserved for the sergeant. He hung it above her booth, a simple tribute that said more than any speech could. The staff followed his lead. The next morning, Elena's coffee was ready before she walked in, the cup waiting at the end of the counter. The barista handed it over herself. No explanations offered, just a quiet, "On the house today." Elena accepted it with a nod, her expression unreadable but not unfriendly. Customers who'd witnessed the event responded in their own ways. The college student who'd filmed the confrontation deleted the footage. The mother who'd watched from across the room paid for Elena's next several coffees, sliding a bill across the counter with a quiet request. The Marine who'd recognized Elena's tattoo left his card and a note, no fanfare, just a small gesture of respect. The atmosphere shifted. People seemed to notice Elena now, offering a nod or a silent salute as she passed. The barista found herself standing a little taller, more aware of the stories carried by the people who came through the door. She realized that courage rarely announces itself, and that the quietest regulars might be the ones who've carried the heaviest burdens. Elena didn't act like anything had changed. She took her seat beneath the framed tab, opened her book, and settled into her routine. But the barista felt the difference here, subtle recognition that some acts of bravery don't need to be retold or explained. They're simply noticed and remembered. Later, as the cafe's hum returned to normal, the barista wondered about the instincts that had driven Elena to move when no one else did. She couldn't shake the image of that calm, deliberate presence, a reminder that some habits, once learned, never really fade. Military training shapes more than just how a person handles crisis, it rewires the way they move through the world. Colton Reeves, a retired Army Special Forces operator, watched the cafe's security footage on a grainy laptop screen, studying Elena's movements as she stood from her seat. He pointed out how, before her body shifted, her eyes swept the room in a quick, practiced order, first the exits, then anything in reach that could be used as a tool, and finally the people. It wasn't a frantic search. It was automatic, the kind of scan drilled into soldiers until it becomes second nature. Reeves explained that these habits don't come from self-defense classes or reading about tactics. They are built through repetition, long days and nights, practicing the same movements until the body responds faster than conscious thought. When Elena stepped between the teens and the old man, her body angled just enough to protect herself and keep both threats in view. She used the space, placing furniture between herself and the group, ready to react but never inviting escalation. "That's not improvisation," Reeves said. "That's muscle memory from years of drills." The confrontation itself was brief. Reeves didn't bother with the exact timing or the technical details. He simply noted that Elena's reaction was too clean to be learned in a few lessons. Her movements were efficient, controlled, and never excessive. She responded to aggression with the minimum force needed, then reset. No taunting, no anger, just calm readiness. "That kind of restraint," Reeves said, "is what separates military training from most civilian responses. It's about control, knowing exactly how much to do and when to stop." After the teens backed down, Elena's demeanor shifted again. Reeves pointed out how she assisted the old man without drawing attention, checking his pulse and grounding him with a few steady words. The transition from protector to caregiver happened smoothly, another layer of her training surfacing without hesitation. Someone once asked Reeves if these skills fade over time. He shook his head. "You don't lose discipline like that. It's not something you forget. It's always there, ready whenever it's needed." For Elena, those years in uniform were never just in the past. They shaped every decision, every movement, visible or not. When the moment called for it, her training surfaced, not as a memory, but as a reflex. That's the difference between someone who's learned a skill and someone who's lived it. And in a quiet coffee shop, that difference was impossible to miss. Service doesn't fad, it shapes how people move, decide, and step forward when others hesitate. Elena's story reminds us that the quietest faces in our routines often carry histories of courage, their strength woven into how they act when no one else will. Share in the comments a veteran whose quiet strength surprised you, or a moment when someone stepped up without fanfare. These stories deserve to be seen and heard. Subscribe for stories of veterans whose training never truly left them, because sometimes heroes brew in plain sight.